Have you ever stopped mid-meal and wondered, could the way I'm reheating my food actually be silently damaging my pancreas? It sounds extreme, almost like internet fear-mongering. But stay with me, because underneath this viral claim lies a deeper, more important truth about how heat, storage, and metabolism interact inside your body. Here's what's really going on inside your body. Your pancreas is not just a digestive organ, it is a metabolic control center. It produces insulin, regulates blood sugar, and plays a key role in how your body handles fat storage and energy balance. When your metabolic system is under chronic stress, high insulin, inflammation, oxidative damage, that is when long-term disease risk begins to rise. Now let's talk about reheated food. The concern is not simply reheating itself. Humans have been reheating food for centuries. The real issue is what happens to certain foods when they are cooked, cooled, stored improperly, and then reheated repeatedly. Let me explain this with a simple analogy. Think of your food like a battery. Freshly cooked food is a fully charged battery. Nutrients are intact, fats are stable, and proteins are structured. But when you leave that food in the fridge, especially for long periods, and then reheat it again and again, that battery slowly begins to degrade. Some compounds oxidize, some fats become unstable, some starches change their structure in ways that can slightly affect blood sugar response. What the research in food chemistry and metabolic science shows is that repeated heating and cooling cycles can increase the formation of oxidative compounds and advance glycation end products, substances that, in high chronic exposure, may contribute to inflammation and metabolic stress in the body. And here is the key point most people miss. Pancreatic cancer is not caused by one single food or one single habit. It is the result of long-term metabolic dysfunction. Insulin resistance, chronic inflammation, obesity, smoking, alcohol exposure, and genetic susceptibility all interact over years. So when people say reheated food causes pancreatic cancer, that is an oversimplification. But when we translate it into real physiology, the concern becomes clearer. Repeated exposure to highly oxidized, heavily processed, or improperly stored foods may add to your overall inflammatory and metabolic burden. And that burden matters because your pancreas is extremely sensitive to insulin demand and inflammatory signaling. When your diet consistently pushes your metabolism into overload, frequent spikes in blood sugar, low-quality fats, and processed leftovers stored for too long, it creates an internal environment where disease risk gradually increases over time. In this episode, I'm going to break down something most people never hear from mainstream nutrition advice. Not fear, not hype, but the real science of what happens when common foods are stored, reheated, and repeatedly consumed, and how this may subtly influence long-term metabolic and pancreatic health. We'll go deep into 5 specific foods that are commonly reheated in households everywhere, yet may carry hidden metabolic risks when handled incorrectly. And more importantly, I'll show you exactly how to fix it without wasting food, without extreme diets, and without fear, just smarter biology. Let's start with one of the most common foods in the world: rice, pasta, and other refined starches. Here's what's really going on inside your body. When you cook starches like rice or potatoes, the structure of the carbohydrate changes. The heat breaks down the crystalline structure of starch, making it easier to digest. That's why freshly cooked rice can raise blood sugar relatively quickly. But something interesting happens when you cool it down. A process called starch retrogradation occurs. Some of the digestible starch converts into a slightly more resistant form. In simple terms, your body absorbs it a little slower, and your blood sugar response can be slightly reduced. This is why some studies show that cooled rice or pasta can behave differently metabolically compared to freshly cooked versions. Now here's where reheating enters the story. When you reheat certain starches, especially if they were stored improperly or reheated multiple times, you can partially reverse or destabilize this structure. In some cases, the food becomes rapidly digestible again. That means a faster glucose spike. Let me explain this with a whiteboard analogy. Imagine your blood sugar like traffic on a highway. Freshly cooked refined carbs are like a sudden rush of cars entering the road at once. Cooled starches are like traffic that enters more slowly and smoothly. But reheating repeatedly can suddenly open all the lanes again, causing a spike in traffic flow. This is your glucose surge. And why does this matter for the pancreas? Because every glucose spike forces your pancreas to release insulin. Over time, repeated insulin spikes can contribute to insulin resistance. And insulin resistance is one of the strongest metabolic predictors of chronic disease risk, including conditions that strain pancreatic function. Here's what the research in metabolic physiology consistently shows. Frequent high glycemic load meals increase oxidative stress, especially in individuals already dealing with abdominal fat accumulation or poor sleep. And when insulin demand stays chronically elevated, the pancreas is under constant pressure to keep up. Now let's make this practical. If you regularly eat reheated rice, pasta, or bread, here's what you should do instead. First, always cool cooked starches quickly after cooking. Don't leave them at room temperature for hours. This reduces bacterial risk and helps stabilize structure. Second, store them properly in the fridge within a few hours. Temperature control matters more than most people realize. Third, when reheating, avoid overheating or multiple reheating cycles. One gentle reheat is safer than repeated heat exposure. And finally, pair these foods with fiber, protein, and healthy fats. This slows glucose absorption and reduces pancreatic strain significantly. For example, rice alone behaves very differently compared to rice with lentils, olive oil, or vegetables. If this is helpful so far, consider subscribing. I post content like this every day that breaks down real metabolic science into simple, usable habits. Now let's talk about something far more concerning than starches: reheated oils in fried foods. Because here's what most people don't realize. Fat is not just fuel, Fat is a highly reactive biological molecule. And when fat is exposed to repeated heat, oxygen, and time, it begins to break down at a chemical level. Here's what's really going on inside your body. When oils are heated once, they begin to oxidize slightly. That's normal cooking chemistry. But when oils are reused, like in deep fried foods, takeout meals, or street food cooked in the same oil multiple times, the breakdown accelerates. The structure of the fat changes. It forms compounds called lipid peroxides and other oxidized byproducts. These are not poisons in the dramatic sense people online describe, but they are biologically active molecules that can increase oxidative stress inside your cells. Let me explain this with a simple analogy. Think of fresh oil like clean engine oil in a car. It flows smoothly and protects the engine. Now imagine that same oil being heated repeatedly, over and over, until it becomes thick, dark, and degraded. It still moves, but it's no longer protecting the engine. It starts creating friction instead. Your body works the same way. When you consume repeatedly heated oils, your digestive system absorbs small amounts of these oxidized compounds. They don't directly damage your pancreas overnight, but they contribute to a larger internal burden: oxidative stress, inflammation signaling, and metabolic strain. And here's the important connection to pancreatic health. Your pancreas is extremely sensitive to inflammatory signaling and insulin demand. When your diet is consistently high in oxidized fats, especially combined with refined carbohydrates, it creates a metabolic environment where insulin resistance becomes more likely over time. Now let's bring this into real-world context. Common sources of reheated or oxidized oils include deep-fried foods from fast food chains, reused frying oil in restaurants or street vendors, packaged fried snacks that sit for long periods, home cooking where oil is repeatedly reheated multiple times. Now, I want to be very clear here. This is not about fear. It's about frequency and accumulation. Your body is designed to handle occasional exposure. What it struggles with is daily repetition. What the metabolic research consistently shows is that diets high in oxidized fats are associated with increased markers of inflammation and poorer insulin sensitivity over time, especially when combined with excess calorie intake and low physical activity. So what should you do instead? First, prioritize fresh oils for home cooking, olive oil for low to medium heat, and more stable oils for higher heat when needed. Second, avoid reusing frying oil multiple times. Once oil has been heavily heated, it should not become your daily cooking base. Third, when eating out, be mindful of foods that are deep fried repeatedly in commercial settings. You don't have to eliminate them completely, just reduce frequency. And finally, balance is key. If you do consume fried or reheated oils, pair them with antioxidant-rich foods like leafy greens, berries, and vegetables. These help counteract oxidative stress at the cellular level. Because remember, your pancreas doesn't respond to one meal. It responds to patterns over years. Now let's talk about proteins, especially chicken, meat, and high-protein leftovers that are reheated multiple times. This is where the conversation becomes even more important because protein is something people usually think of as always safe. But here's what's really going on inside your body. When protein-rich foods are cooked at high temperatures and then reheated again, they undergo chemical changes in their structure. One of the most important changes is the formation of compounds called advanced glycation end products, or AGEs. Let me explain this with a simple whiteboard analogy. Think of proteins in your body like soft, flexible ropes. They are meant to move, bend, and function smoothly inside your cells. Now imagine those ropes being exposed to intense heat again and again until they become stiff, sticky, and brittle. That stiffness is what AGEs do at a molecular level. They make proteins less flexible and more damaged in biological terms. Now here's what the research in metabolic science shows. Higher dietary exposure to AGEs is associated with increased oxidative stress and inflammatory signaling in the body. Over time, this can contribute to insulin resistance, vascular stiffness, and higher metabolic strain, especially in people already dealing with poor sleep, high stress, or excess abdominal fat. And why does this matter for the pancreas? Because the pancreas is deeply connected to insulin signaling and glucose regulation. When your body becomes more insulin resistant, the pancreas has to work harder and harder to produce more insulin just to maintain balance. That chronic overwork is what eventually leads to metabolic dysfunction. Now let's make this practical. Reheated chicken, especially when it is dry, overcooked, or reheated multiple times, tends to have higher levels of these glycation compounds compared to freshly cooked protein. But again, this is not about fear or avoiding protein. Protein is essential for muscle, metabolism, and longevity. The key is how you cook, store, and reheat it. Here are simple science-based adjustments. First, avoid overcooking protein in the first place. The more intense the heat and browning, the higher the age formation. Second, store cooked protein properly in airtight containers and refrigerate quickly to slow down further breakdown. Third, when reheating, use gentle heat methods like steaming or low-temperature warming, instead of high-dry heat like frying or microwaving until it becomes dry and rubbery. Fourth, balance your meal with antioxidants. Foods like vegetables, herbs, and spices help counter oxidative stress generated from dietary AGEs. And here's the most important insight of all. Your body is not damaged by a single reheated meal. It is shaped by repetition, by daily patterns, by what you do most of the time. So instead of perfection, aim for awareness. Let's bring everything together now, because if you only remember one idea from this entire episode, it should be this. This is not a story about reheated food. This is a story about metabolic load over time. We explored how reheated rice and starches can shift glucose dynamics. We looked at how repeatedly heated oils increase oxidative stress. We examined how reheated proteins can raise advanced glycation end products. And we saw how improper storage can quietly change the biological quality of food before it even reaches your plate again. But here's the deeper truth underneath all of it. Here's what's really going on inside your body. Your pancreas is not reacting to isolated meals. It is responding to a lifelong pattern of insulin demand, inflammation, sleep quality, stress levels, and dietary consistency. Let me simplify this with one final analogy. Think of your pancreas like a highly skilled factory worker. It is designed to produce insulin when needed. But imagine if every day, multiple times a day, you keep increasing the workload. High sugar spikes, low fiber meals, oxidized fats, and repeatedly heated processed leftovers. At first, it adapts, it compensates, it keeps up. But over years, that constant pressure begins to reduce efficiency. The system becomes less sensitive, less responsive, and the pancreas has to work harder just to maintain normal blood sugar balance. That is the real metabolic story behind insulin resistance. Not one food, not one meal, but repeated stress signals over time. So what should you actually take away from this? First, don't fear leftovers. Fear misuse of leftovers. Food safety, storage timing, and reheating methods matter more than the act of reheating itself. Second, focus on quality patterns, fresh oils when possible, properly stored starches, gentle reheating methods, balanced meals with fiber, protein, and antioxidants. Third, reduce repetition of high heat, heavily processed foods, not elimination, just awareness and moderation. And finally, zoom out. Because pancreatic health is not built in a day, it is built in thousands of small decisions that either lower or raise your metabolic stress. The most powerful shift you can make is not perfection, it is consistency in better choices. Now, here is your challenge. Try just one change today. Maybe it's storing your rice properly, maybe it's reducing fried reheated foods, maybe it's reheating your meals more gently instead of aggressively, and then observe your body, not in hours, but over weeks. Energy, digestion, cravings, and focus often begin to shift when metabolic stress is reduced. That is how real health transformation begins. If this added value to your understanding, like the video and subscribe to join others who are optimizing their metabolism, energy, and longevity naturally, without fear, just science and awareness. Stay consistent, stay informed, and take care of your metabolism. It is taking care of you every second of your life.